Whatever you expect to find, it's worse. The old man blocked my path just outside the private elevator, his voice calm enough to disappear beneath the sound of the string quartet drifting through the ballroom. I almost laughed. He was one of those faces everyone in Chicago recognized, a billionaire whose name appeared on the hospital wings, university buildings, and magazine covers. A man who could have been anywhere that Friday night, yet here he was standing in front of me. "I'm sorry," I asked. His gray eyes never left mine. "Your wife is upstairs." "I know," I replied with a smile. "They're preparing the surprise announcement." He slowly shook his head. "No." Then he leaned closer. "Whatever you expect to find, it's worse." For a second, I wondered if he'd mistaken me for someone else. My wife Claire had invited me to the celebration herself. After 29 years at Preston Capital, she'd finally become regional vice president. It was the biggest accomplishment of her career, and I couldn't have been prouder. Why would this stranger try to ruin that moment? I thanked him politely, stepped around him, and walked into the private elevator. The doors closed. The ride lasted less than 30 seconds. I still remember watching the floor numbers climb. 23, 24, 25. When the doors opened, soft jazz spilled into the hallway. A suite door stood slightly open. I walked toward it. I pushed it wider. 2 minutes later, my blood ran cold. 3 weeks earlier, until that night, I believed I had one of those marriages people envied. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 62 years old, retired after nearly 4 decades teaching American history at Lincoln High School in Naperville, Illinois. History had always fascinated me because every great tragedy began the same way. Someone ignored the warning signs. I never imagined I'd become one of those stories. Claire and I met when we were both 28. She had just started as a junior financial analyst. I was a first-year teacher making barely enough to pay rent. Neither of us had much money, but we had dreams. She dreamed of climbing the corporate ladder. I dreamed of building a family where everyone felt safe coming home. For more than 30 years, we believed we'd accomplish both. We raised 2 wonderful children, paid off our mortgage, survived layoffs, recessions, illnesses, and the ordinary storms every American family eventually faces. When Claire's career demanded longer hours, I adjusted. When my aging mother needed full-time care after her stroke, I retired earlier than planned. People told me I was sacrificing too much. I never saw it that way. Marriage isn't a scoreboard. Sometimes one person carries more weight. Sometimes the other does. Eventually, if you're lucky, life balances everything out. Or so I thought. Looking back now, the warning signs were embarrassingly obvious. Claire started protecting her phone like it contained government secrets. Business trips became more frequent. Anniversaries were postponed. Conversations grew shorter. She still kissed me goodbye every morning. She still asked if I needed anything from the grocery store. She still remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. Those small routines convinced me everything else was fine. Maybe that's what long marriages do. They teach you to trust familiarity more than your instincts. Then one Tuesday evening, Claire walked into the kitchen carrying a gold envelope. Her smile looked brighter than I'd seen in months. "I finally got it," she whispered. "The promotion?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I want you beside me when they announce it." I hugged her so tightly she laughed. Neither of us knew that invitation would become the beginning of the end. The weeks leading up to Claire's promotion felt almost like old times. Almost. She came home smiling more often, humming while she cooked dinner, even suggesting we spend a weekend at our favorite bed and breakfast in Galena after the celebration. "You've earned a vacation too," she said one evening, as we sat on the back patio watching the sunset fade over our neighborhood. I smiled. "I thought this promotion was your reward." "It is," she answered, reaching for my hand. "But I wouldn't have made it without you." Those words stayed with me, not because they were unusual, because they were exactly what I wanted to hear. For 34 years, I had measured success differently than Claire. She measured it by promotions, corner offices, and responsibilities. I measured it by family dinners, birthdays, and whether our children still wanted to come home for Thanksgiving. Neither of us was wrong. We were just counting different things. Our son Ethan had inherited Claire's ambition. At 33, he already managed operations for a technology consulting company downtown. Sharp suits, luxury watches, conference calls during dinner. He admired people who built empires. Our daughter Emily took after me. She became a public school librarian in Aurora, believing books could change lives the same way history once changed mine. She drove an aging Honda, volunteered every Saturday, and never forgot to call her grandmother. Watching those two grow into such different adults always reminded me that parents don't shape children nearly as much as life does. The Sunday before Claire's celebration, both of them came over for dinner. Emily arrived first carrying homemade apple pie. Ethan showed up 20 minutes late apologizing as he loosened his expensive tie. Work never stops, he joked. Claire laughed. It gets worse the higher you climb? They shared a look that lasted only a second. At the time, it meant nothing to me. Now I remember it perfectly. During dinner, Ethan spent most of the evening asking Claire about executives attending the promotion party. Who's hosting it? Mostly board members. What about investors? A few. I heard some pretty influential people will be there. Claire casually nodded. Probably. Emily rolled her eyes. Can we have one meal without talking about work? I chuckled. That's my girl. For a moment, everything felt wonderfully normal. After dessert, Emily helped me wash dishes, while Claire and Ethan continued talking quietly in the living room. I miss when Mom laughed more, Emily said softly. I looked toward the family room. Claire was smiling. She seems happy lately. Emily didn't answer right away. Finally, she shrugged. I guess. Something in her voice caught my attention. What is it? She dried another plate before speaking. Nothing serious. You sure? She forced a smile. I probably worry too much. Maybe she did. Or maybe she saw something I refused to see. That night, after everyone left, Claire found me in the garage organizing old fishing gear. You've been quieter than usual, she said. I was thinking about retirement. She slipped her arms around my waist. You've always taken care of everyone else. She rested her head against my shoulder. After Friday, I promise things will slow down. I kissed the top of her head. I'd like that. She looked up at me with the same warm eyes I'd trusted for more than 3 decades. There wasn't a trace of guilt, not a crack in her smile. If someone had asked me then whether I trusted my wife with my life, my answer would have been immediate, without hesitation, without doubt. 3 days later, I put on my best navy suit, picked up the small velvet jewelry box containing the anniversary earrings I'd secretly bought for Claire, and drove toward downtown Chicago, believing I was about to celebrate the proudest night of our marriage. Instead, I was driving straight toward the moment that Billionaire would stop me in the hallway. By the time I reached the Palmer House Hotel, the sun had disappeared behind Chicago's skyline, leaving the city glowing beneath thousands of lights. A valet opened my car door. Good evening, sir. I smiled and handed him the keys. It certainly is. At least I believed it was. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne while a jazz quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Every guest seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I didn't. I had spent 40 years in classrooms, not luxury hotels. Still, I wasn't embarrassed. Everything I'd done in life had helped put Claire here. And tonight was about her. The ballroom buzzed with conversations about quarterly earnings, mergers, investment portfolios, and charitable foundations. Most of it sounded like another language. Then I spotted Claire. She looked breathtaking. Her midnight blue gown shimmered beneath the lights, and when she laughed, people naturally gathered around her. For a moment, I simply stood there watching her. That was my wife, the woman who had once cried with me over overdue utility bills, the woman who had celebrated when I received my first Teacher of the Year award, the woman who had promised we'd grow old together on the front porch of a little house somewhere quiet. She caught my eye across the room. Her smile widened. She excused herself from the group and hurried over. You made it. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. She kissed my cheek. I have to meet with the board for just a few minutes upstairs before the announcement. No problem. I'll come get you. She squeezed my hand. I love you. I love you too. Then she disappeared toward the private elevators. I watched until the doors closed. Minutes later, a distinguished older gentleman approached me. He was dressed simply in a charcoal suit, but everyone who passed greeted him with unmistakable respect. I'd seen him before. Richard Ashford, founder of Ashford Financial Holdings, one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. He looked at my name tag. Daniel Harper. Yes, sir. I'm Richard. I know who you are. He offered a polite smile that never reached his eyes. I was hoping we'd meet. I frowned. I'm sorry, have we met before? No. His expression suddenly changed. The warmth disappeared. Instead, he looked concerned. He glanced toward the elevators. Would you walk with me? Confused, I followed him into a quieter hallway away from the music. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he stopped. Mr. Harper? His voice was calm, almost gentle. Whatever you expect to find upstairs. He paused. It's worse. I stared at him. I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else. I wish I had. My wife's meeting with the board. I know. Then I don't understand. He studied my face for what felt like forever. You will. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded an explanation. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. I thanked him, turned, and walked toward the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of Richard Ashford standing alone in the hallway. He didn't try to stop me again. He simply lowered his head, as though he already knew exactly what those next 2 minutes were about to cost me. The elevator doors opened onto the 25th floor. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Soft jazz drifted through hidden ceiling speakers, almost masking the sound of laughter coming from the penthouse suite at the end of the corridor. The door was cracked open. No security, no assistant standing outside, just enough space for me to push it wider. I took a deep breath. Then I stepped inside. The suite overlooked downtown Chicago through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal glasses rested on a marble countertops. A catered dinner had been arranged for a dozen guests. Only there weren't a dozen people. There were 4. Claire, a man I recognized from the company website, Michael Reeves, Preston Capital's executive vice president, Richard Ashford's attorney, and Richard Ashford himself. Everyone turned toward me. For 2 full seconds, nobody spoke. Claire looked as though she'd seen a ghost. Daniel, she hurried toward me. This isn't... I raised my hand. No. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't angry. It was calm. I'd rather hear the truth. Michael took one step backward. Richard Ashford remained exactly where he was. Claire swallowed hard. I can explain. I looked at Michael, then back at Claire. You were hugging him. It wasn't what you think. I almost smiled. People always say that. Always. Richard Ashford finally broke the silence. Mr. Harper, Claire spun around. Richard, please. He ignored her. I warned you. He wasn't speaking to Claire. He was speaking to me. Then he looked toward the attorney. I believe it's time. The attorney quietly opened a leather briefcase and placed several folders on the conference table. Claire's face lost every bit of color. No, Michael whispered. Richard folded his hands. This meeting was never about exposing an affair. I frowned. What? He slowly pushed one folder toward me. Read the first page. I looked down. The heading read, Internal Ethics Investigation. Below it, Claire's name, Michael's name, several senior executives, pages of financial records, email printouts, bank transfers, expense reports. I looked up. What is this? Richard answered. For the past 11 months, my foundation has funded an independent investigation into suspected corporate fraud inside Preston Capital. Claire's breathing became shallow. Daniel, I never wanted you involved, Richard continued. But yesterday I learned something. He paused. You weren't just being lied to. Another folder slid across the table. This one had my name on it. I opened it. Inside were copies of mortgage documents, retirement account statements, loan paperwork. My signature appeared on several pages. Except, it wasn't my signature. Not really. Someone had practiced it over and over until it looked convincing. My stomach tightened. What am I looking at? Richard's attorney spoke for the first time. Mr. Harper, someone refinanced your home 18 months ago. I stared at him. Our home, yes. I never signed refinancing papers. You didn't. The attorney pointed to another document. The signatures are forged. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. I looked at Claire. She couldn't meet my eyes. Claire, her lips trembled. I was going to tell you. When? Silence. When everything worked out, still silence. Richard quietly continued. The equity from your house wasn't the only money moved. Another statement appeared. My teacher's retirement account, nearly $400,000, transferred, piece by piece, into investment partnerships I had never heard of. My knees felt weak. For 34 years, I had believed betrayal meant another person, another relationship, another romance. I was wrong. The affair wasn't even the worst part. The woman I'd trusted with every paycheck, every tax return, every retirement plan, had quietly built a second life using my name, and somehow, I still hadn't learned the whole truth. Richard looked directly at me. I'm afraid we're only getting started. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry. Anger burns hot and fades. What I felt was colder than anger. It was the slow, heavy realization that the life I'd trusted for more than 3 decades had been quietly rewritten without my knowledge. Around 3 in the morning, I sat alone in the kitchen with every light turned off except the one above the stove. The folders Richard Ashford had given me covered the table where Claire and I had celebrated birthdays, paid bills, and helped our children with homework. I kept staring at the forged signatures. My name, written by someone else's hand. Claire came home just after sunrise. She looked exhausted. Her mascara had smeared beneath her eyes, and for the first time in years, She seemed uncertain about walking into her own house. Daniel. I didn't look up. The coffee's fresh. She stood quietly across from me. I know how this looks. I let out a tired laugh. Claire, that's probably the one thing we don't need to discuss. She lowered herself into the chair opposite mine. I never meant for it to get this far. I slid one of the mortgage documents across the table. When exactly was this far? She couldn't answer. Instead, tears filled her eyes. The investments were supposed to make enough money to pay everything back. So you gambled our retirement? They weren't supposed to be risky. Our home? Silence. My pension? More silence. Finally, she whispered, Michael convinced me it was temporary. There it was. Not an excuse. Not really. Just the first honest sentence she'd spoken since the night before. I trusted him. I looked at her for a long moment. And I trusted you. Those 6 words seemed to hurt her more than anything else I'd said. She buried her face in her hands. I know. That afternoon, Richard Ashford invited me to his office overlooking the Chicago River. It wasn't the extravagant place I'd expected. The furniture was modest. Family photographs lined the shelves instead of awards. One picture caught my attention, a younger Richard standing beside a smiling woman and 2 little boys. He noticed me looking. My wife. He smiled sadly. We lost her to cancer 12 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He poured 2 cups of coffee. I didn't ask you here because of the affair. I figured that. The affair is a symptom. He slid another folder across his desk. The disease is greed. Inside were months of investigative reports. Federal filings, audit summaries, emails recovered from company servers. Preston Capital executives had created shell companies, inflated consulting fees, and shifted investor money through fake partnerships. Claire wasn't the mastermind, but she'd signed approvals that made the scheme possible. So what happens now? I asked. Richard folded his hands. The FBI already has most of this. I blinked. The FBI, they've been investigating for nearly a year. I leaned back in my chair. And you, I've been helping them. He paused. My foundation invested in Preston Capital years ago. When our auditors noticed irregularities, I could have walked away. But you didn't. No. He looked out the window toward the river below. My father taught me something when I was a boy. He smiled faintly. If honest people stay quiet because the truth is uncomfortable, dishonest people always win. For the first time since my world had fallen apart, I felt something other than grief. Purpose. Not revenge. Not hatred. Purpose. I wasn't interested in humiliating Claire. I wasn't interested in watching Michael lose everything. I simply wanted the truth to stand where lies had stood for far too long. As I left Richard's office, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. Dad, he said, sounding unusually nervous. Can we meet tonight? There's something I should have told you a long time ago. A chill ran through me. Somehow I knew this conversation would change everything all over again. I found Ethan sitting alone in a quiet corner of a steakhouse overlooking the Chicago River. He wasn't wearing one of his tailored suits, just jeans, a gray sweater, and an expression I'd never seen on my son's face. Fear. He stood as I approached. Dad. I nodded. Ethan. For a few awkward seconds, neither of us sat down. Finally, he pulled out a chair for me. I ordered coffee. Thanks. The waitress filled our cups before disappearing, leaving the silence between us untouched. Ethan rubbed his hands together. I don't know where to start. Try the truth. He swallowed. I knew Mom and Michael were working together. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. How long? About a year. A year. He nodded without looking up. I thought it was just business. And the affair, his eyes closed. I found out 6 months ago. The words landed harder than I expected. You knew. I did. And you said nothing. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought if I stayed out of it, it would all work itself out. I stared at the son I'd raised to believe honesty mattered more than comfort. When did silence become the same as doing the right thing? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his backpack and placed a small flash drive on the table. I copied these from Mom's laptop. I frowned. What's on it? Emails. He slid it toward me. Messages between Michael, Mom, and several board members. My stomach sank. Why are you giving this to me now? Because yesterday the FBI contacted me. That caught my attention. They know I accessed company files. Were you involved? No. He answered so quickly that I believed him. But I knew enough that they wanted to question me. He looked up, his eyes filled with regret. I kept telling myself I was protecting my family. He laughed bitterly. I didn't realize I was protecting the people destroying it. 2 weeks later, Richard Ashford called. It's time. The annual shareholders meeting was being held at Preston Capital's headquarters. Hundreds of investors filled the auditorium. Executives smiled for photographers. Television crews waited outside. Claire sat beside Michael in the front row. She looked exhausted, older, as if the past 2 weeks had stolen years from her face. Richard stood quietly near the back beside federal investigators. He nodded once. Exactly at 10 o'clock, the company's chairman stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. The auditorium doors opened. 6 FBI agents entered. Behind them came agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Conversation stopped instantly. One investigator calmly approached the stage. I'm Special Agent Laura Mitchell. She held up a folder. We have federal warrants authorizing the seizure of corporate records and electronic devices. The room erupted. What is this? There must be some mistake. Lawyers rushed forward. Cameras turned. Phones came out. Michael stood so quickly his chair tipped backward. Claire remained frozen. An agent approached her. Ms. Harper, we'd like to speak with you. She nodded slowly. No resistance. No argument. Just quiet surrender. I watched from the back of the room beside Richard. Neither of us celebrated. There was nothing joyful about watching lives collapse. Justice rarely looks like victory. More often, it looks like consequences finally catching up. As agents carried boxes of documents past us, Richard spoke softly. People think revenge is watching someone fall. He shook his head. It isn't. What is it? I asked. He looked across the room at Claire. It's surviving without becoming the person who hurt you. I watched my wife walk beside 2 federal agents. She glanced back once. Our eyes met across the crowded auditorium. There was no anger in hers, only shame. And for the first time since opening that penthouse door, I realized something unexpected. I no longer wanted her punished. I wanted her to tell the truth. Because only the truth had any chance of saving what little remained of our family. The headlines lasted for days. Preston Capital executives under federal investigation. Senior leaders resign amid fraud probe. Shareholders demand accountability. Every television in every airport coffee shop and doctor's office seemed to be talking about the same story. People weren't discussing Claire's promotion anymore. They were discussing the collapse of one of Chicago's most respected investment firms. I turned the television off. I'd seen enough. For the first time in 34 years, the house was completely silent. Claire had moved into a furnished apartment downtown, while her attorneys advised her not to discuss the investigation with anyone. Her side of the closet stood empty. Her favorite coffee mug was gone. Even the lavender candles she always lit on Sunday evenings had disappeared from the kitchen counter. The absence hurt almost as much as the betrayal. Emily came by nearly every evening after work. She never tried to pretend everything would be okay. Instead, she did something far more valuable. She showed up. One evening, she brought homemade chicken noodle soup. You probably haven't eaten much, she said as she placed the pot on the stove. I've had cereal. She raised an eyebrow. Cereal isn't dinner. It is when you're 62 and living alone. That earned the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. As we sat at the kitchen table, she finally asked the question both of us had been avoiding. Have you talked to Mom? A few times. How is she? I stared into my bowl. Broken. Emily nodded slowly. So are you. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know what I've been thinking. What? I don't think Mom ever planned to become this person. I looked up. You still believe that? I do. After everything, Emily sighed. I work with children every day, Dad. I've learned something. What? Most people don't wake up wanting to ruin their lives. She paused. They just make one bad decision, then another, then spend years convincing themselves they're fixing the first one. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Maybe she was right. Maybe Claire hadn't crossed one giant line. Maybe she'd crossed 1,000 tiny ones, each easier than the last. Ethan called 2 days later. His voice sounded hollow. Dad, can I come over? When he arrived, he looked like a different man. His expensive watch was gone. His tailored suits had been replaced by wrinkled jeans and an old sweatshirt. He looked exhausted. I resigned. I nodded. I heard. No company wants to hire someone connected to this. I'm sorry. He laughed bitterly. I deserve that. No, he looked surprised. You deserve the consequences of your choices. I leaned forward. But you don't deserve to believe your life is over. His eyes filled with tears. I failed you. You disappointed me. He lowered his head. I thought success meant protecting the people with power. I shook my head. No, son. It means protecting the people who trusted you. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something I'd been waiting weeks to hear. I should have told you the truth the first day I knew. Yes, I was afraid. I know. I thought Mom would hate me. I looked at the boy I'd once taught to ride a bicycle. The teenager I'd helped through algebra homework. The young man who had stood proudly beside me when I retired from teaching. Greed hadn't stolen my son. Fear had. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it helped me understand it. As he stood to leave, I stopped him. Ethan. He turned. Come for Thanksgiving. His eyes widened. After everything, I nodded. We can't rebuild this family if nobody is willing to walk back through the front door. For the first time in weeks, hope quietly entered the room. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was the first step toward it. Thanksgiving arrived with gray skies and a cold wind sweeping through the neighborhood. In past years, Claire always insisted on hosting. She would spend 2 days preparing dinner, polishing the silverware she'd inherited from her grandmother, and reminding everyone that Thanksgiving wasn't about the food, it was about showing up for one another. The irony wasn't lost on me. This year, the turkey sat in my oven. Emily made the pies. Ethan volunteered to set the table. Claire wasn't supposed to come. At least that had been the original plan. Around 11 that morning, my phone rang. It was Claire. I know I shouldn't ask, she said quietly, but could I see you just for a few minutes? I looked through the kitchen window at Ethan helping Emily carry folding chairs from the garage. Come over. I don't want to ruin your day. The day was already ruined months ago. She didn't answer. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Claire pulled into the driveway, she wasn't driving the luxury SUV she'd loved for years. Instead, she stepped out of a modest used sedan. She looked smaller somehow. Her tailored business suits had been replaced by a simple navy coat, and there wasn't a trace of makeup on her face. For a moment, we simply stood on the front porch looking at each other. Neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, she held out a thick envelope. I signed everything. What is it? The divorce settlement. I looked down but didn't open it. My attorney said you'll receive the house, your retirement accounts, and every dollar that can legally be recovered. She swallowed hard. I won't contest any of it. I studied her face. You know why I asked you to come? She shook her head. So I could hear something from you that no lawyer can write. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry. Those 2 words came out broken. I didn't just betray you. She wiped her cheeks. I betrayed the man who believed in me before anyone else did. Her voice trembled. When we were young, you worked extra classes so I could finish graduate school. I remember. You stayed home with your mother because I said my career couldn't slow down. I remember that too. And every time you trusted me, she looked away. I mistook your kindness for permission. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she whispered the words I never expected to hear. I stopped measuring success by the people I loved. She shook her head slowly. I started measuring it by people who would have forgotten my name the day I retired. I could have listed every lie, every forged document, every sleepless night. Instead, I asked one question. What happens now? She took a deep breath. I've accepted a position with a nonprofit that teaches financial ethics to young professionals. I blinked. The salary isn't even close to what I made before. I didn't ask about the salary. I know. A faint smile crossed her face. For the first time in years, I think I'm finally doing honest work. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Emily stepped outside first. Behind her came Ethan. All 4 of us froze. Ethan looked at his mother with tears already forming. I'm sorry, Mom. Claire covered her mouth. No. She walked toward him. I'm the one who should be saying that. He embraced her tightly. She broke down crying in his arms. Emily quietly slipped her hand into mine. Families don't heal in dramatic moments. They heal in quiet ones. Standing on that front porch, I realized something. Justice had already done its work. What happened next wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about whether we were brave enough to become a family again. Winter settled over northern Illinois, one quiet morning at a time. The maple tree in our front yard had lost every leaf, leaving its bare branches reaching into a pale December sky. For years, Claire had always been the one to hang the Christmas lights while I untangled extension cords from the garage. This year, the house stayed dark. Not because I didn't have the energy, because I wasn't sure what we were celebrating. The legal proceedings moved much faster than I expected. Within 3 months, Preston Capital had filed for bankruptcy protection. Several executives accepted plea agreements. Michael Reeves resigned before formal charges were announced, but his career in corporate finance was over. His name disappeared from business magazines almost as quickly as it had once appeared in them. Claire cooperated fully with investigators. She returned every dollar she could legally recover, testified honestly, and accepted responsibility for the documents she had signed. Her attorney called me one afternoon. "Mr. Harper, the court wanted us to let you know the restitution process has been finalized." "What does that mean?" "Your retirement accounts have been restored." I closed my eyes. "And the house, it remains yours." After we hung up, I walked through every room slowly. The living room where Ethan had built blanket forts. The dining room where Emily practiced piano recitals before every school concert. The kitchen where Claire and I had danced one New Year's Eve after the children were asleep because we couldn't afford to go anywhere else. It was still just a house. But somehow it felt like home again. Not because everything had been repaired. Because the truth no longer had to hide inside these walls. A week before Christmas, Emily called. "Dad, I'm volunteering at the community center Saturday. They're hosting a financial literacy workshop for seniors. Sounds like something your old history teacher might enjoy?" She laughed. "They actually need another volunteer." "I'll be there." The community center was packed. Retirees filled folding chairs while local professionals explained how to recognize investment scams, protect retirement savings, and avoid financial fraud. As I walked into the auditorium, I froze. Standing at the front of the room beside a projector screen was Claire. She saw me immediately. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face. Then she simply nodded. No embarrassment, no attempt to avoid me. Just quiet acknowledgement. Her presentation wasn't about excuses. It wasn't about blaming Michael or Preston Capital. Instead, she looked directly at the audience and said, "The easiest financial fraud to miss is the one committed by someone you trust." The room became completely silent. She continued, "I know that because I became part of one." There was no dramatic speech, no emotional performance, just honesty. After the workshop ended, several older couples stayed behind, asking questions about retirement accounts, powers of attorney, and protecting family assets. Claire answered every question patiently. When the room finally emptied, she walked over. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wasn't expecting you either." She smiled faintly. "I almost canceled." "I'm glad you didn't." For the first time in months, our conversation didn't revolve around lawyers, investigations, or regret. Instead, we talked about helping people avoid the mistakes we'd lived through. As we left the building together, Ethan pulled into the parking lot. He climbed out carrying 2 boxes of donated books. "I've been volunteering here too," he said. Emily laughed. "So now we're all helping the same place." Ethan shrugged. "I figured rebuilding something was better than sitting around mourning what I destroyed." No one spoke for a moment. Then I realized something. Our family wasn't returning to who we used to be. We were becoming something different, something humbler, something wiser, and maybe something stronger than before. By the following Thanksgiving, the house looked alive again. Emily arrived first carrying 2 pumpkin pies, just like she always did. Ethan followed with his famous sweet potato casserole, insisting he'd finally perfected the recipe. "I still don't trust anything you call famous," I teased. He laughed. "You'll change your mind after one bite." A year earlier, hearing him laugh had seemed impossible. Now it sounded like home. The biggest surprise came just before noon. A familiar blue sedan pulled into the driveway. Claire stepped out, carrying nothing but a simple basket of homemade dinner rolls. No expensive gifts, no designer handbag, just warm bread wrapped in a white kitchen towel. She paused before walking to the front door, almost as if she were asking permission without saying a word. I opened it before she could knock. "Happy Thanksgiving." Her eyes filled with quiet relief. "Happy Thanksgiving, Daniel." Inside, Emily hugged her mother first. Then Ethan. There were tears. There were awkward silences. But there were no speeches. Real healing rarely begins with perfect words. It begins with people choosing to stay in the same room. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang again. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Richard Ashford stood on the porch wearing an old wool coat instead of one of his custom-tailored suits. In one hand, he held a pecan pie from a neighborhood bakery. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I smiled. "Not at all." Emily quickly found another chair while Ethan poured him a cup of coffee. Richard looked around the table before quietly saying, "This is much nicer than most board meetings I've attended." Everyone laughed, even Claire. After dinner, we moved into the living room where snow had begun falling outside the windows. Richard walked over to the fireplace and studied the family photographs on the mantel. One picture showed Claire and me on our wedding day. Another captured Ethan graduating from college. Another showed Emily reading to her grandmother only a few months before she passed away. Richard smiled. "You know," he said softly, "people spend their whole lives trying to build wealth." He turned toward us. "But wealth isn't what survives us." Nobody interrupted him. "My father used to say, money can build buildings." He paused. "Character builds families." The room became wonderfully quiet. I looked around at the people sitting in front of me. Claire had lost the career she'd spent decades chasing. Ethan had lost the job he once believed defined him. I had lost the certainty that my marriage would never change. And yet, somehow none of those losses were the end of our story. Because truth had done something revenge never could. It gave every one of us the chance to become better than the people we had been. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone on the front porch, watching fresh snow cover the yard. A year ago, I'd walked through a penthouse door, believing my life was over. Now I understood something I couldn't have imagined back then. The greatest victory wasn't exposing lies. It wasn't watching careers collapse. It wasn't winning legal battles. The greatest victory was refusing to let betrayal turn me into a bitter man. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. Reconciliation didn't erase the consequences. But together they gave our family something far more valuable than the fortune we'd almost lost. They gave us another chance. If this story reminded you that integrity matters more than success, or that even broken families can begin to heal when truth and humility lead the way, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need that reminder today. And if stories about resilience, forgiveness, and second chances speak to your heart, I'd be honored if you join me again. Thank you for listening. The end.